Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to our MLH Live panel on the future of tech education. My name is Amanda Davria, and I am the head of fellowship admissions here at MLH. I've been a long-time proponent of education, a longtime professional in the education space, and I'm here with three other amazing speakers, and we're going to spend the next hour or so talking about just the future of tech education in general, how we can make it more equitable, what the most powerful resources are out there that we can use to empower our hacker community to continue learning and developing their skills. So I'm going to turn it to my panelists to introduce themselves. Neha, you are on the upper right of my screen, so I will start with you.
Hey everyone, hi. Amanda, thanks for having us here and letting us join this panel on MLH. Great opening ceremony and all the best with everything you have coming over the next few days. As a quick introduction, I started off in the domain name industry 15 years ago. So I've pretty much done everything there is to do with domain names by now across product management and sales and channel partnerships. I'm here representing .tech domains today. And .tech today has over 350,000 domains that we support across entrepreneurs, startups, tech enthusiasts, developers, and students, such as many of those that have joined us here today. So once again, thanks for joining us and looking forward to this panel.
Thank you so much, Neha, for being here. Pat, would you mind introducing yourself next?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Pat Young Pratt. Right now, I'm in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for a nonprofit called code.org, code.org. And if you're on the computer, feel free to check out our website, code.org. Our mission is to promote computer science education so that all schools teach it and all students have the opportunity to learn it. I've been doing computer science education for probably over 20 years now. So I started as a middle school teacher, and then I was a high school teacher, and then for the last 8 years and a bit, I've been at code.org. And right now I focus on a lot of state, local, and national and international policy, all policies to promote computer science education. Thanks, Amanda.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Juan Pablo, will you share with us?
Hey everyone, I'm Juanpa. Lucky enough to be in this channel a couple of times before. I'm a program manager at the GitHub education team, where my work is to support students across the world to build inclusive communities that might help other students to teach or learn new skills through their own communities. And a pleasure to be here joining you. I've been also working on other projects within GitHub to support students to develop the skills that they might need before they graduate. And our whole mission with GitHub Education is to provide you with everything that you need to be successful in your career as a software engineer or in the tech industry in general.
All right. Well, thank you all for taking time to be on our panel today. To kick us off, I thought I would start with a question. Thinking about the world today, we're starting to come out of the COVID pandemic, more so in some places than others, but we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And education systems around the world, from young kids all the way through graduate schools and beyond, all had to scramble overnight to adjust to the realities of the world in the pandemic. Overnight, we had to move to remote learning. Overnight, all the, the normal collaborative ways of being had to change. So in your opinion, and Juan, maybe this is something for you to start if you have thoughts, what did we learn during this scramble for all education to go remote in the last year to 18 months? And how can we apply what we've learned to tech education going forward?
Well, there are multiple things that we learned from the GitHub side. One of them was that for us, something that was very incredible at the beginning of the pandemic was the number of requests for the student developer pack increased considerably as we started to go through the pandemic. And one of the most redeemed projects or products or services that we have were education services just for people to learn or keep themselves learning during that time. For us, something that was also very interesting to learn was very particular, for example, the case of India, where the students very much go to hostels or stay very close to the university or move to another city to go to uni. That also happens in other countries, but this was something that we noticed the most in India, was how important it was to have access to the internet. And as folks started to go back to their hometowns from the schools that they were part of, a lot of them started to struggle with having a good connection, with good bandwidth to be able to take online classes. So those two for me were some of the most eye-opening moments of the pandemic. And in other hands, in other topics, we also saw more teachers being open to change the way that they were teaching, in a sense that for some, we also had an increase in teachers using GitHub Classroom to teach their classes, and they were looking for new ways in which they could keep teaching and keep having those industry standards in their classes. So a lot of teachers starting to move from a model where the students would give their code via email or via USB, or if you are from a country that loves disks or any kind of like physical way of storing your code, they started to move to other methods. One of them, of course, was through GitHub repositories, and just watching how fast some colleges were able to do those changes was impressive for us. And that's why we started to do, Aurelia, who is also part of the GitHub education team, started doing Teacher PD, which is a professional development course for teachers on how to teach with GitHub. So it's not only about providing the tools, but also providing the methods and teaching teachers how they can use these tools that they have on their hands to be able to teach the next generation of developers.
Got it. So it's a lot about both access and the need for additional professional development, it sounds like. Neha, Pat, any additional thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I think just taking a slightly broader perspective on this, in 2020, when the pandemic actually hit, all the progress that was made in education, not just computer science or tech education, just generally, suddenly came to a halt, where students started to get disconnected, and the backup system, which was, out of school education, had to take over. And that's where we started to see several gaps bubble up. These gaps probably or always did exist, but I think the pandemic just shone a lot more light on it and brought them a lot more to the surface. So the big question that we also need to be addressing as a community that's directly and indirectly involved in the tech space is, how are we going to bridge that gap moving forward, right? Because post this pandemic, even if we were to go back into schools, these inequalities and inadequacies don't get corrected. So I think it's a broader question that we all need to address. Through public service, through private, companies thinking about it, through platforms exactly like this. The starting point for different communities, different countries, different socioeconomic backgrounds isn't the same. So when we're talking about what we can do in terms of the future of education, I think there's just a lot of other aspects that we need to take into account.
Yeah, and I'd like to share some thoughts as well, starting with adults, actually. So code.org has probably provided professional development for over 120,000 teachers over the last 8 years, and all that's in person. And obviously that changed very quickly when the pandemic hit. And it came at the worst time because the pandemic hit around March, April 2020. And it seems like forever ago. Yeah, 2020. And our workshops usually take place in June, July, and August, the summer in the US. And so we had to switch things up very quickly. And what we learned is, number one, on the good side, you can actually reach a larger population of teachers through online PD than you can with in-person PD. So it's a lot harder to expect teachers in rural areas to travel, every day to this center, even if that center is a regional center and not like in a metro center, but it's a regional center in their area, it's still a ways to go. And as we know, as adults right now, folks, it takes a lot for us to have to now meet in person. I mean, the bar is a lot higher, right, for meeting in person than if we can just do something online. And so, you know, in the tech world, that was already kind of a thing, like meeting online, because, you know, people are working all over the place. But in the education world, that just wasn't a thing. You know, there's no, you know, holding Zoom meetings with other adults just didn't happen. So, you know, that was a great thing that we learned with PD, that we could reach a larger audience and a more rural audience. For students, what we learned, and this isn't just code.org, but what we all learned was that remote learning really can be really bad, really, really, really horrible for kids. And I have 3 kids, and I saw it in person, and all of my adult friend community and neighbors said the same thing. Even teachers, my teacher friends said the same thing, like, this is tough, this is hard. And for teachers out there, you know, I'm with you guys. It was tough. You hung in there, even when you knew it was bad, you still did it just to get through it. And hopefully you have something different going on. And hopefully your school district learned that hybrid remote learning, like teaching in person and remote at the same time, just doesn't work. It's like a great idea, but it doesn't work. By the way, that's another thing that we learned. And so folks were trying lots of different things. And I think most of all, what districts learned was that how wholly unprepared they were for digital learning, even though they had maybe even a digital learning department. It just, you know, scaling it out to every single kid in a district is just a different matter, let alone in a whole state or nation.
So it sort of sounds like a theme that came up from all of you on this. You know, what did we learn is, you know, both how powerful remote education can be, but also how far we are from, you know, really being able to make it work in many different contexts and for all different students, right? So as we, you know, exit the pandemic, if you will, you know, whenever that is sort of fully happening, what are some things we're going to have to be thoughtful about, or what are we going to have to be aware of as we move into whatever education looks like after this? And anyone who has a thought can start. Yeah, go ahead.
We'll go backwards this time. How about that?
Perfect.
So there is a silver lining to the pandemic, folks, for K-12 education, and that is with the spending spree that happened all across the US and most of the world as well. There are more computers and more internet access in kids' hands than ever before. And so what that means is that these kids have access to these amazing creation portals, not just learning portals, but things they can use to make and impact and influence the world. And so what I would like to see coming out of the pandemic is those computers not just being used for remote learning or playing Roblox, but to, you know, kids are actually learning how to use them not as entertainment devices, but as creation devices. So whether that's, you know, coding on GitHub or creating a web page or creating an app, working on code.org, whatever, that schools continue to use those laptops in powerful ways and don't just take them back or, I don't know, pull them out every now and then, that it really does transform education. The plethora of devices and internet access really does transform education for the better, for the long haul.
That's such a great example. Neha or Juan, anything to add?
Yeah, I think, you know, just to build on what Pat just said, access to computers is great. And I think another, with the focus on so many different private companies even coming into the space of focusing on education, a lot more creators are coming online, which means a lot more material is available online. Learning management systems are self-paced, it's on demand, so there's obviously advantages as far as that is concerned. Also, it's about like meeting the students where they are, as opposed to there being like a one-size-fits-all for everyone. So that's another big takeaway in terms of more customized learning, as opposed to just a fixed curriculum for every student out there. So I think those are the plus points that come out of what we've learned in the last 1 year that we can take forward into the next.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna just build on top of that because I do agree that in my university, remote learning always was one of those departments that was left on its own and really had a really small budget. People didn't understand very well how they worked and the benefit from it. And with that pandemic, they started to become one of those priorities, and they started to get more budget, and they can play around more with the things that they had. And I'm very excited to see how this model is going to work out in the future in terms of like, are they going to keep this model of supporting a lot remote learning, which I would love to, because it's giving access to the students from across the world for learning resources. And the other thing that I really liked about the pandemic was, I don't know about you, but I remember in March and April when we were all kind of like starting to, we didn't know what was going to happen, but a lot of people started to create their own blogs or their own video channels on YouTube. And a lot of those folks are still creating content, and now they have an audience that follows them. So these new avenue of new perspectives, I've seen people that I probably would never met before if it wasn't through virtual events and virtual learnings or classes they're giving online. So I really hope that, even though there's still a problem with access to the internet, I did saw a much diverse group of content creators rising. And that came on in all different mediums, not only on videos on YouTube, but also in written blogs like Dev2. Dev2 grew a lot during the pandemic. And it was the cool thing about these new mediums is that they are very small. They're very small pieces of content, so the blog can be very small, and that opens an opportunity for everyone to start creating. So having those avenues for everyone to join a conversation and everyone to start making their own content from their own perspective, I'm super looking forward to keep seeing those creators growing in the future.
Amazing. So thank you, everybody. We've already heard a couple times now the themes of, access and gaps in access or gaps in opportunity that are potentially things that we can address both in tech education more broadly and also in this particular moment as we step out of the pandemic and think about where we're going from here. So I think that makes a good segue to talk a little bit about the My Start in Tech Challenge with Neha and Pat. I know you've both been involved in this. For those who don't know on the stream, the hashtag My Start in Tech Challenge is sponsored by both .tech domains and code.org, working together in partnership, during which .tech domains is donating 100% of their sales proceeds to code.org between now and July 5th, with the goal of increasing access to computer science education for young women and students from marginalized communities. So Neha and Pat, in creating this challenge and hearing these stories of how people got their start in tech, what has it made you realize, or what has it underlined for you about access to tech education, and how do we continue to improve access from here?
Okay, so I'll start. I'll just take a couple of minutes to take a step back in terms of how this fits in with, how things started out and how we went down this path of My Start in Tech. So when we launched our tech about 6 years ago, we've always been focused on the innovators and the creators of tomorrow. And it's our goal to make sure that we are actually empowering them and creating spaces for them to thrive. Right? So as we started doing that and talking to startups, talking to people involved in the tech space, there was one point that kept coming up, which was access to computer science education and equity in that space. And as we started going down that path and looking more into it, that's where we came across what code.org does, and Pat will cover more about that. But that's where we really saw the synergies between what code.org was trying to do and what our mission was at .tech. And that's why we started My Start in Tech, which, like Amanda, you covered, is for everyone to share how they got their start in tech while vouching for the inadequacies or inequalities that exist today, building more awareness for that, so that we can help others get their break and their start in tech, just like some of us did, in the years before. So that's the genesis of the campaign. And I'll just take a couple more minutes and talk about what we saw as coming out as some of the themes from our conversations. One of the things we saw coming out quite a bit was that tech and computer science education was not necessarily something that students ventured into from the very beginning. It was something that was an add-on course that came about either in their higher education and beyond. And to us, that basically also brought about the question of bringing computer science education into primary education, and where does that discussion lie today? So that was one of the themes that we really took away. I'll let Pat continue with more, and if there's time, I'll come back on that.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about code.org. And so where's all this money going, and what are we going to do with it? So code.org, gosh, another way to explain what code.org does, other than our mission and vision, which I already shared earlier on, is that we are doing everything it takes to inject the K-12 system with computer science, or to introduce a new subject, computer science, into the K-12 system. So it was probably 40, 50, actually even longer, 60, 70 years ago now, that the last subject was kind of added to the K-12 menu, and that was art education. From there, I mean, at least in the US, education has basically been the same. Math, language, social studies, science, etc. Now code.org is and lots of other groups and partners and such are trying to add computer science to that menu, because we all know if the pandemic hasn't shown us, then nothing will show us how important computing and knowing how to use the power of computing is to our lives. And at code.org, we're not talking about kids using computers to like online bank and to use apps. We're talking about kids creating those websites and creating those apps and creating those games, etc. And so the more we have a lot of creators and more diverse creators, the better our world is. And so we do a number of things. We advocate for policies at the state, local, national, international level. We do a lot of promotional events, things with celebrities. You can check out our videos on YouTube. We create free curriculum, K through 12, starting very young, like Nia said. And then we also train teachers, because if you don't train a teacher, you don't get a classroom and you don't get kids learning computer science. And so hopefully in the end, we will get a more diverse crowd of creators, and we'll get more of them. And so that's what code.org does, and we're really excited to be part of this campaign.
That's awesome. Thank you both. As you can see, the URL for the My Start in Tech campaign is up on the screen. It is startin.tech. So if anybody wants to check that out, please do so. For now, though, I'll throw a question over to Juan. Since we've been talking about, creating access to education and using technology tools to build and create, I'd love for you to chat a little bit about GitHub Education and the Student Developer Pack. So GitHub Education is known, of course, for giving resources away for free to young developers through their Student Developer Pack. What are some additional resources, or really like keystone resources, you believe students most need access to right now, and how do we go about getting them into the hands of the hackers and coders who need them most?
Well, that's a broad question, but generally speaking, when the Student Developer Pack started, which I think it was like 5 or 6 years ago, if not more, was basically just to be able to give students access to learning resources without them having to pay to learn. So imagine being a student not only in the US, but in most countries. Probably at that age, you still don't have a credit card that you can use to register for a service if you want to try out, I don't know, how to send an email with XYZ service. So making sure that students have access to learning resources without having to pay and making it easy for them to get access to all of them was a key point on the Student Developer Pack. On the other hand, there's still a lot of work that we want to do with the pack. One of those changes came recently with the virtual event kit that we launched. So now is not only about like you have access to 100 services and 100 products, but now is how do you use those services and products that you have access to start building your career. And even though the virtual event kit is not necessarily something for your career as a computer science student, it does help relieve one of the biggest struggles that campus experts and other student community leaders have brought to us, which is having to pay for the services to live stream for their community is something that is very expensive very fast. Well, it gets expensive very fast. So we wanted to make sure that we are opening that or solving a struggle that most student organizers were facing. I would say something that I would highly encourage folks, like code.org, like I'm a big fan. I did learn HTML through code.org at like a long way ago. So I really appreciate that they have free resources. But I would say for most students, just being able to access some of the free online courses that we have on the pack can be life-changing. We have a lot of folks who are right now changing their degrees from politics into computer science because they want to learn what this code thing is. And for me, something that is very important to have a very clear difference is that coding and computer science are kind of like the same thing, but at the same time they're very different on what they are. I do believe that coding is just a very small part of what computer science is. There was a very known phrase from Jack Astra, which was telescopes are for astronomy the same as computers to computer science, something like that, which basically was not everything in computer science should be like about computers. There's like a lot more around that you can do with as a computer scientist. So I believe that's something that I would love to see more in the future is the way that we teach computer science, in a sense of not only teaching them. For me, my introduction to computer science was, here's your Word or your spreadsheet, and this is computer science, right? And this probably is only in my country. Probably other countries have more refined courses on computer science. But that it can be an extreme barrier for people to say, this is not something that I can see value on. So there's a lot of other opportunities to teach to code without actually coding. Like there's a very good program called Unplugged Coding, which is basically teaching algorithms without having to code them, which I think is great for people who see an editor and just like get scared, just like avoids getting into there. Understanding computing, I think, is kind of like more one of the things that we need to start learning more without computers per se.
Absolutely. Sort of like, expand the definition of what computer science and computer science education can actually be, which is an interesting segue into something I wanted to touch on. And Juan, maybe I'll have you pick up on this one and then we'll throw it to the group. When I was prepping for this panel, I was looking into the phrase, tech education. Like what does the internet have to say about tech education, right? And what was really fascinating about that search is when you Google tech education, what you get is education technology, which is similar to your point about how coding and computer science are not exactly the same thing. Teaching technical concepts and technical gadgets are not necessarily the same thing, right? And access to technical gadgetry is limited, whereas one of the things we've talked about already on this panel is we want to broaden access to technical concepts. So as I said, Juan, maybe you can start with your thoughts on this. Like, how do we uncouple those concepts that like you can have a technical education experience without necessarily having a lot of technical, gizmos to support that? And how do we empower creative ways to teach technical concepts, even in a let's call it a low-tech environment?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of insight on that sense, but what we've noticed is the same thing that we noticed with content creators. And now that we have this stream team on GitHub Education, I think it's a very similar concept where a lot of the times it's not about the tools that you have access to, but it's much more about like the content, right? So some of the students that we had had like super good cameras, and others have not that good computers to stream, for example. But yet, like, both were able to start creating content and start creating all of their all of the the content that they were looking forward to create. I do believe that still hardware is hard to solve in some countries, and again, access to internet is still a thing. Most of the times when we interview folks that we know come from countries where they struggle with both, we want to learn like how do they do it, right? It's not easy for them to have access to a YouTube video if you don't have kind of like access to a computer, or if you don't have access to internet. So it's kind of like interesting hearing that. So for example, like access to books were fundamental for them, and being able to have offline resources available so they can take them to go. But I want to think that Pat and Niha will have a lot of more insight around how you can decouple this concept.
Wonderful. So yeah, absolutely. Please, maybe Pat, we can start with you. How do we uncouple these concepts?
Yeah, I think those of us who are in the tech world who are listening right now understand that everything doesn't come down to what the software engineers are doing. We understand that everything's not centered around the software engineers. I mean, there are whole huge aspects of project management, marketing, understanding the clients, the interface between the users and the technology itself, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there are these huge aspects that kids don't really understand when they get into coding. They think that coding and software engineering is it, and that's all you have to learn to make stuff that impacts the world. And it's certainly important. It's certainly critical and fundamental, but it's not everything. And I think if we broaden the what is required to make these products and make them work well for a diverse group, we help kids who might not be as into the coding aspect, but still into technology, see that there are other things that they can focus on and other ways that they can contribute with their own talents and experiences. I think so. One way to do this, by the way, if any of you are going to run a hackathon in the future yourselves, like for kids, it would be to, just kind of give examples of projects that other people have submitted that are, and don't focus on the technical side as much as focus on all the other pieces as well. Like, what's the purpose of it? How was it presented? What does it look like, etc.
Fantastic. Sort of broadening the definition of what it means to contribute in a technical project or in a technical space. Niha, you had something to add, I believe.
Yeah, so I was going to say that when you talk about ed tech and technology education, it's a common parallel that's drawn is like trying to teach someone English, trying to teach them to read, but not really to write. Right? So you try to teach them how to use the technology, but not really how to build that technology. And to the points that Pat and Juan made, there's so many aspects to it. So introducing children to that at the grassroots levels, introducing computing concepts and those different aspects of it in very basic levels as kids grow and one level at a time is probably what's going to get us closer to imbibing that whole computer science education that we want in the long run. So many other topics, like whether that's math or the other sciences that we learn, you build on them, right, as you go from grade 1 to 2 and further on. But with computing and computer science, we don't start like that. So I think that's another aspect for us to think about. There are obviously low-tech ways of doing that, of introducing these concepts right from the very start, and that might be another interesting take on this entire thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Get start it early in the same way that we start math education or science education early, right? And Niha, that actually brings me to another question that I wanted to throw your way and then sort of out to the group. As you said, we can start tech education much younger than we currently do, but there's the access problem sort of overlaps again, right? As an example, here even in the United States, only 47% of high schools even offer a computer science course, and I'm sure that percentage looks different, and you get even younger than high school as well, right? So where would you start with getting tech education in front of younger students or begin students at a younger age? What policy changes or suggestions would you make to education structures to do what you're describing, which is, let's start tech education at a younger age or put it in the hands of younger students?
Yeah, I'm no expert in policy and also coming in from India, so the situation is completely different here. I think we're talking about a lot more basic, one covered in terms of access to just internet and devices and stuff like that, right? So yeah, I think my perspective is slightly limited on that front, but simple things like, bringing technology and that conversation into schools and classrooms and teachers where they talk about it a lot more, right? They talk about how technology matters and how that impacts the lives of children, how it impacts what they do on a day-to-day basis. I think bringing those conversations and bringing those to the forefront are what would help in the long run. So yeah.
Yeah, one policy that we promote at code.org is we talk to departments of education and legislators and governors, et cetera, about the idea of requiring schools to offer computer science. And so what that means is that it's not that it's not a new graduation requirement where, kids have to take 3 years of math and 1 year of computer science, though that would be nice. And we're only really, in the end, probably asking for 1 year of computer science. But we're not even asking that. We're asking for something easier to do, which is just to require high schools to offer it. Just put it on the menu. That's what we're saying. And, I'm looking at the chat, by the way, and Lee Chant says, there were no computer science courses in my high school. I got lucky. And that's the whole point of that policy, just so that kids aren't lucky now. They're not lucky that they went to this high school or that high school, that every high school has computer science on the menu. And once high schools see that kids love it and like kids are signing up for it and they're enrolling in it, then they'll probably move towards the step of like requiring it for graduation. And there are actually states that are doing that right now. Arkansas became the second state in the US nation to make computer science a graduation requirement. South Carolina had already had that. And Arkansas just did that like a month and a half ago. And actually Rhode Island has it as a bill, and it's being heard in their legislature like this week. And next week or the next week after that, it might be law in Rhode Island as well. And so I'd say the main policy that needs to happen is just to require schools to at least put it on the menu. And I'm saying K through 12, not just high school, by the way.
Yeah, I agree with Pat. I think it should be part of the menu that you are able to take one of these courses. From what I was reading in other my starting tech blogs or kind of like stories, most of the people that joined tech in a very early stages was because they had like one person that came to them and was like, hey, there's like this world that you can be part of as well. And it shouldn't be that you're lucky. It should be kind of like everyone should have an opportunity to be able to explore computer science from an early stage without needing to have like that special teacher that knew how to code and saw that you had kind of like some sort of talent or you were good at it and offered you extra help, right? In my case, I do believe that we need to have almost more folks being involved with computer science or at least learning some introduction course of how computers work. It's very normal that computer engineers get questions like, hey, I want to buy a new computer, but I don't know which spec should I look for. That's a clear sign that we're doing something terribly bad when we are requesting people to have tools, but they don't understand the tools and the characteristics and how they work. So by informing more people about how computers work and how they can get involved with coding, we're also creating more agents that can join the conversation when we talk about social media and the importance of algorithms and like all of these conversations that fortunately there has been like some folks making content around that, but probably for most of them, they see the content and they consume it. They might understand a big chunk of it, but if you're able to understand a little bit more about what computers do, probably you can have a more informed conversation and be able to provide more perspectives about how to solve a struggle, which is something that we've seen a lot lately with folks changing careers to computer science. It's just great hearing stories of folks being able to add, I don't know, climate change algorithms and libraries and frameworks because they knew how to code, and turns out that they have that specialty on or that degree. So bringing more diversity and being able to teach people, just as we teach math, teach a little bit of computer science would be great.
Got it. A follow-up question I have, and maybe we'll start with Pat, and then Neha or Juan, you can jump in if you have thoughts, is what do you see as the biggest barriers to putting computer science education on the menu, so to speak? Like, how do we open that up to more schools, and what are the things that are holding schools or school districts back from offering computer science on the menu?
Yeah, the main barrier that we're seeing right now is that school districts see education as a zero-sum game, meaning you add something, you got to take out something. And okay, so let's say that's the case. Let's say if you do add something, you do have to take out something. The thing that actually holds us back at that point is not the zero-sum game idea, because we're assuming that that's just true. The thing that holds us back is how do I say this? And not, I don't want to diss other subjects, right? But rethinking, why are we learning what we're learning? Like, what? Like, where's this stuff even come from? Why am I learning 12 years of math? Like, why do I have to take pre-cal? Like, you know, the stuff that I'm doing with, you know, fractions, yeah, great. But why am I multiplying negative fractions? Like, what? Where in the world will I see a negative fraction ever in life? Or even multiplying negative numbers? Like, why am I doing that? Like, I don't want to be a mathematician. And in fact, there are very, very, very few students coming out of high schools who are majoring in math to be even a mathematician. Usually, if they're majoring in math, they're majoring in math to do something else. So, you know, I think the thing that's the greatest barrier in education, period, no matter where we are, in the US, in Germany, in India, in Mexico, wherever, is we're just stuck, like, learning these things because it's just tradition. And we don't leave room for all the other things that make more sense.
Sounds like a big sort of reprioritization would be your argument. And your thoughts are getting a lot of love in the chat. You're getting a lot of true, quite true, +1. So I think you've got an audience of like-minded. Neha or Juan, anything to add to that?
I think funding would just be another big aspect of it. So beyond the desire to want to add that, just the funding required to, you know, just add that as a subject, but also support it with the infrastructure and the training for teachers in that space. I think that would be another factor to be considered.
That makes a lot of sense. All right, wonderful. So we've talked a lot about, you know, how to get, you know, the topics of tech education, computer science education in front of more people and improve access to tech education. A question I have for the group, and maybe Neha, you can start us off and we can sort of kick it around to the group, is, you know, when we think about tech education, of course, you know, things like coding come up and hardware skills and so on. What are the pieces of like soft skill training and soft skill development that you think are critical to being a good citizen of the technical world? Like, where does that fit in the world of tech education, and how can we start to make that part of the conversation as well?
I think so soft skills is a misnomer. It's pretty hard as a skill to develop. I think just knowing all of those, the concepts that go into it and how those need to be developed over time. But, you know, plainly put, soft skills is the ability to interact with other people, communicate with other people, and then, you know, that ties in also to ethics in some way. So I think it's all interconnected. But as someone that's creating something, the first part and most important part of that is going to be able to communicate your idea to either the consumers or people who are going to invest in your project, for example, right? So unless you're going to be able to really communicate what you want to achieve and how you want to achieve it, without having those skills to be able to do that, you're going to be at a disadvantage. So I think it's extremely important to build that. So that's communication, and then I'd say collaboration, right? Which is another skill to be developed in that space. You're very rarely going to be building something all on your own. You're going to need the support of others to get you through some aspects that you know, but there are so many other layers like we covered earlier to get that product to market. So I think those are the multiple facets of soft skills that the community needs to build, and that will help take students further.
Fantastic. Other thoughts on that? Juan, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very recent story where we were talking about how so one of the conversations we're having a lot in Latam is how can we bring more people to start coding or get involved in computer science. And it turns out that one of the biggest barriers that students are finding is the people communicating about computer science at their schools are engineers or researchers. So many times the conversation is very kind of like towards the people that already want to be engineers and already want to be researchers. So when someone that is probably studying something in communication and might be interesting for them being part of learning how to code or studying computer science, for them the narrative is does not fit to them, because we have the same people giving these conversations. So going back to the question, that's why soft skills are so important. Learning how to communicate not only between engineers, but being able to communicate with people that might not be technical and teach them or just like inform or simply like have a conversation with them about tech without being so technical can be a life-changing experience for some folks, and see that technology is not that thing that someone in some someone in a basement is coding and is hacking the bank, but rather it's just like, people with nice shelves in the background and a good chair are doing as well. And we are all kind of like in the same struggle and in the same moment. So being able to communicate computer science as something that anyone can be part of is a key component, and that is related to the soft skills.
Absolutely, and sort of bridging that relationship between the technical and non-technical divide, so to speak. Pat, did you have something to add?
Yeah, just one little practical tip. I agree with everything that Nia and Juan said. If any of you all are running, again, hackathons, competitions, projects, maybe you're a TA or something in a college course, I think making explicit the learning of the soft skills within the project. And what I mean by that is either assigning it points, making it criteria. So, sometimes with the whole idea of presenting and communicating, what Nia was talking about, it's kind of like it's an important thing. You have to do it, because otherwise, you just don't get to the next stage of the project or whatever. Like, everyone knows you need to do it, but there isn't any explicit learning around it as part of the project. Like there's explicit learning of like particular coding techniques or this or that, or, you have to use this type of algorithm or whatever. But, kids aren't being asked to research and learn about how to do this or that better in terms of communication, teamwork, and then reporting back on it. So what I'm just saying is just make the soft skills more of an explicit part of the learning experience, rather than just, it's important and it will just happen, automatically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Provide scaffolding and learning opportunities for that, just in the same way that you would for the quote unquote hard skills, right? So we are at about 10 minutes to the end of our session. So I'm gonna let the folks who are watching know that if you have questions for the panelists, you can start dropping them into the chat now. And what I'll do is for Neha, Pat, and Juan, a question to maybe finish up on is what else? Are we leaving anything out here that needs to be addressed? We've talked a little bit about access. We've talked about putting technology in the hands of more people at different ages. But what are some big themes about your thinking around tech education that we either hadn't gotten to or that you'd like to add to the conversation today? Neha, I'll start with you.
I think just piquing interest in this space for students by making the stream be as exciting as it is, right? And starting that early, showing students at all ages, right from when they start off, that there is so much that you can achieve and grow and build if you know how to do this, right? You can be the creators of tomorrow if you have access to an understanding of this space. So I think just bringing that and finding ways to inspire the next generation is what our education system needs to focus on to take people down that path. So I just leave off with that.
I'll say the same thing. It's all about inspiration and engagement. And so just figuring out what does inspire the audience that you're working with, what will engage them. You know, is it, you know, in the end, let's say, again, it's a coding project, but maybe what inspires them is not the coding, it's the, oh, wow, you can get this in front of 1,000 people and really change, you know, their viewpoint on a particular issue with the app or the website that you're creating. That's powerful. Don't you want to do that? Oh, every kid, yeah, of course I want to be, you know, do something meaningful and all that, you know, and teachers as well. And so, oh, okay, so the way to do that is to learn this technique and, you know, get on GitHub and get on code.org or whatever, you know, create this domain, yada, yada. That's how you do it. Oh, okay, so now I know why I'm doing this stuff. It's not just because it's cool and techy. Yeah.
Yeah, finding the deeper why comes back to that idea of inspiration, right?
Yep.
Juan, anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, if one of the biggest part for me as kind of like a Latino in tech, in getting involved into tech, is kind of like having some figures that you see that people are doing like great. And unfortunately, there are a lot of countries and a lot of contexts where it's really hard to find kind of like these people. So I really appreciate, like, first of all, for making the story public. I've been talking with a few folks and being able to have like someone from Latam being there can help people to know kind of like they're not alone in this story about like probably they're struggling with something or they're doing great with something else, hopefully. And the whole idea is providing visibility to marginalized communities in tech, being able to give them the stage, hear their voices, and see how we can open more spaces for folks that might be from that group to feel that they belong in tech and that they can do and have their break in tech is, I would say, one of the most fundamental and initial points that we should start doing more. It's really hard for some folks to get kind of like that inspiration from their own. So just being able to open more spaces and being able to share more stories. I know I'm not a super introvert, but for me, sharing stories sometimes feels awkward. But you never know, like creating that content and making sure that you're visible as well. And for you folks to provide that visibility, I think would help a lot to make people feel that they belong here in tech and that they can do a great job.
Absolutely. And I think you make a really good connection that, you know, like inspiration and visibility in the tech space go hand in hand, right? Like the one feeds the other, and so on. So we have some questions in the chat that I'll throw up on the screen. The first one that I'll share with the group is from Deshex7, who asks, how important is in-person learning for coding? Can coding not be taught as effectively online? Pat, do you want to maybe try take a stab at this one first, and then we'll share it with the group?
Well, I think coding can be taught very well online. And here's the thing that coding has over other topics being taught online. The subject coding is the same thing as the instructional vehicle, the computer. So there's like dissonance when you're learning like social studies or math. Well, actually math, your computer's kind of, but social studies online, because, you know, then there's the environment you're learning it in and it doesn't really fit. But, you know, coding, I mean, you're coding on a computer and you're learning on a computer. That means the whole platform can be tailored around the subject you're learning. So that means that you can have, auto testing, and you can have, stuff working in the background, making suggestions to your code, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, I'm not just making this stuff up. There are a lot of environments that actually do these kinds of things, including code.orgs. So I think coding could totally be taught online. I think lots of providers are doing it very well. Is it better in person? Yes, I'll still say it's better with a human element, but that human element doesn't have to be in person. It could just be a little box, like a chat box in your, like a little window. And I know environments that have that little window with a human coach helping you along and having access to your code and seeing what you're doing and all that. So I think the human element is very important. It's better, but online coding I think is great.
Awesome. Neha or Juan, anything to add?
Just that from, again, the conversations that we had with a lot of students on MLH and in general through the campaign, most have actually learned coding and especially their advanced coding through online courses. And in many cases, the open source course is available online. So that's what students have used largely to advance. So yeah, there's merit in it, there's success in it, and I think that could work.
Yeah, I agree. I think if as someone that works in tech, I think creating that habit of learning online is fundamental to have a successful career. So I completely agree with Pat that being able to have everything in your screen at the same time without having to have like these mixed mediums to learn is great. But I do believe that something that is important for online courses is kind of like, and very particular with education, is to have that content made specifically to be taught online, rather than having that mix idea of online learning as, unfortunately, like Zoom calls that they are a great solution, but I don't think they are optimized for online learning.
That makes a lot of sense. Got it. We've gotten a couple different flavors of this question in the chat, so I'll highlight this one, which is from Rupert Bothma, who asks, is there any advice for junior devs to know what learning platforms to use or what looks good on a resume? And there have been a couple other questions in the chat about what do I need to learn to break into my first job or to become a remote developer, for instance. And so just to broaden the question a little bit, I think I'll throw it to the group. What advice would you give to a junior dev or somebody who's looking to get their start in tech? What should they be thinking about, in your opinion? And Juan, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So, well, something that we've seen has increased lately. A lot of more recruiters are looking to GitHub profiles and projects. So right now it's not only about your portfolio, kind of like that resume, but it's also your coding portfolio, which actually they can learn a lot from when they're going through applications. I think the fellowship is one of those that also are taking code as a way to apply to the fellowship. So that's why it is not important to have a super clean and perfect GitHub profile, but it's important to have one or two projects there that you're very proud of. And about the learning platforms, and kind of like just my biggest advice for any junior dev is, if first of all, if there's no, search for people around you that can help you to start learning and get involved in tech. If there's not a local community, then it's a great time to start one. And I'm sure that if you're feeling that way, there's a ton of other students that might feel the same way. So being able to have not only formal education in terms of what the university is teaching you, but also having informal education as a community of like-minded folks that want to learn and grow, I think that's the best combination that you can get to have a successful career.
And can help you build both those hard and soft skills that we were talking about earlier.
Totally.
Right? Neha, anything to add? Advice for people breaking into the industry?
I think taking the practical aspects of what you've learned and showcasing your projects. So obviously what you've learned, but then how you actually implementing those. That's what's really going to also help you stand out from everyone out there. So what are the causes you've picked up? What have you put into practice? And really being able to bring those forward through your resume in creative ways would also help.
Fantastic. And Pat, do you want to bring us home?
Yeah, I'm going to answer a question about how to handle burnouts when we code and study continuously. Because I agree with Nia. I don't have anything to add to what Juan and Nia said, but I do have something to add about this, because I burned out hard in college. Here's a quick story. It was midterms, and everyone's studying in the library 7-8 hours a day. At one point, I just closed my book and I'm like, I'm done. And I played video games for 2 days straight. And this shows my age. I played Metal Gear Solid on the original PlayStation for 2 days straight, like the whole time, because I was so burnt out. And the key to not being burnt out is to not get to the point where where something like that happens, and have other things in your life that you look forward to. Like, just even if it's just one thing in your week, other than coding and studying, that you look forward to. It could be getting on the bike. It could be whatever. Hopefully it's something off of a computer as well. So it's not League of Legends. It's something that you just look forward to. That's just one thing, playing the violin for 1 hour, whatever. That's the way to get around burnout.
I love that answer. Lots of love in the chat for the original PlayStation. I share that love. So big fans all around. Well, thank you everyone for attending our panel on the future of tech education. Thank you, Neha, Juan, and Pat, for this great conversation. This has been a ton of fun. Everybody enjoy the rest of your afternoons and enjoy the rest of MLH INIT. I'm sure we will see you all again soon. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.